All right, Parsha 101, Parshas Mishpatim. Parshas Mishpatim, there is a lot going on in this Torah portion. A lot of mitzvos are listed. We're actually going to go through them all because a lot of people know, oh, there's 613 mitzvot, but what are they? So we know a lot of the main ones, but there's a lot. And it also just shows how integrated the Torah is into our lives and how it affects every part of our lives. Because leading a Jewish lifestyle and being dedicated to God, it's not just about once a week, a few times a year, or whatever. It's all of us. It's our whole lives. So the first the name Parshas Mishpatim comes from the first verse of the Torah portion. Ve'ela Mishpatim asher tasim lefaneim, and these are kind of like the ordinances, the laws that I have set before you. So a lot of what's going to be happening here is civil law that is going to be covered here. Now, it also, the portion kind of goes a little bit back and forth because we're looking now, we're kind of going to the days before the giving of the Torah. We're going back in time a little bit. And it talks about how you should set up a Beis Din, a Jewish court, right? Also to arbitrate these, to adjudicate in legal cases. And it's specifically, like you say, civil law, I could go to any court. So yes, that's true. And even in any court, the rulings might all be the same. But going to a Jewish court shows that these civil laws that we're following is not just about, this all makes sense in a legal sense, but also because we do this because God commanded this to us, and not just because this sort of makes sense to us. And it's just a general idea. So now, the first mitzvah that it speaks about in this Torah portion is called the Eved Ivri. Translated kind of like as a bondman. Okay, so this is someone, a thief, who can't pay back his debt, and so he gets sold by the court until he could pay off what he stole. And however long that's going to be, is a general idea. He can work for up to 6 years, then he's set free in the Shemitah year. So that could be the length of it. If he comes and is unmarried, then he's going to leave unmarried. If he has wife and kids when he's sold, then the new master is now obligated to care for the wife and kids while he's in their service. So he's got to make sure that they're taken care of. If he's already married, there's this whole thing where he could be married to like a not Jewish bondwoman maidservant, and that the kids will then belong to the master. And if after the time when he's done, if he doesn't want to leave them, then the master brings him to the court, and the court pierces his right ear. He stands with an awl. He stands under the doorpost. He stands against the doorpost, and it pierces his awl. And then one way or the other, he must go free in the Yovel year, which is the 50th year. So after 7 Shemitah years, 7, the 50th year is called the Yovel year. And they pierce his ear because the ear that heard that God is your master and you are slaves to no one anymore, right? The ear that heard you should not steal. This was a thief, and the doorpost that represented when we painted the doorpost with the blood, and that was the end of the slavery. Now, just to kind of should have said this at the beginning, just to point out here, a lot of what we're looking at is the basic explanation of the Torah portion, right? So this is the written law. The oral law is going to explain a lot of things, especially if at face value they seem a little bit confusing or what's going on here, which is why the oral law is so important. You say, well, why wasn't the oral law written down? Well, because then we won't have 5 books of Moses, we'd have the 5,000 books of Moses. So the written law and the oral law must be studied together. There have been times in history where there were certain sects who were like, it's only about the written law, the oral law is just whatever, and they were wrong because we need both. Anyway, so the next mitzvah that it speaks about is called the Jewish bondmaid, is kind of what they call it. This is if a man is he's so not well off, and he's so poor he can't take care of his family, and he sells a daughter who's before the age of before puberty, he could sell her as a maidservant. Now, the hope of this is that she will become engaged to either the master or the master's son or something like that. So the hope is that even though he's kind of selling her to be a maidservant, the intention is that it will actually up her situation. And then the money that gets paid for her is kind of considered like the betrothal money. Now, there's a whole thing, though, that if the master doesn't want to marry her, then he has to help redeem her, even before the 6 years are up. Right, and he can't sell her again, and the father's not allowed to sell her again because it kind of uses the language of betrayal. Like she'd been betrayed once by being sold, now they're both betraying her, and you can't just keep selling her until you find someone. Now the son of the master is allowed to marry her, and he has to treat her with full marital rights, which is considered food, clothing, and conjugal rights. And even if the son ends up marrying somebody else, taking on another wife, she does not lower in status. She must always be considered, like a full wife. Okay, then the next mitzvah goes to is that if a person strikes a man, he strikes someone else, and that person dies, then there's a death sentence for that. Now, if the person did not lie in wait, as in it wasn't a premeditated murder, and it was, if you call it accidental or unintentional, then he flees to what's called the city of refuge. This is first mentioned here. It's going to go much more to cities of refuge in later Torah portions, so we won't go too much into it here. There is an idea that, part of the whole thing with unintentional murders, or someone kills somebody else, you call it kill someone else, and it was unintentional, this, that, whatever, is that, God's paying attention, of course. So there are times that if there's no witnesses, which you need a witness to convict murderers, right? And there's no one who saw the unintentional killing happen to say, hey, this is what happened. And the court's like, well, you better make a run for it, Any of these things happen, then there's a whole thing about God will make sure that, let's say, the murderer, who was never convicted, will end up at an inn, and he's going to sit beneath a ladder. And the man who killed unintentionally and there were no witnesses to say, this guy's got to, go to one of these cities of refuge because he can't be in society right now. He's going to climb that ladder, and it's going to fall down, and it's going to kill the murderer. And at that point, so the murderer will have his punishment, he'll die, and then the person who killed unintentionally, this is going to be witness, and he's going to have to flee to a city of refuge. So that's a whole thing, but this is what it is. There's another thing that if a child strikes a parent and inflicts a wound, these are all, intentionally, things that are intentional, not if someone bumps into somebody, all intentionally done, then there's death by strangulation. It's also someone curses the parents, there's punishments for that. If someone kidnaps and sells someone, and that person has been seen in their possession, then that person is put to death through strangulation, right? They say, hey, we saw that this person had that person who's now been sold as, sold. Next we go to that if two people are fighting, and one strikes another with like a fist or a stone or something like that, then first they arrest him to know whether or not the other person's going to live. If the person lives, then they're just they pay for the loss of the work and the medical bills. They have to compensate the victim, right? This is also a time actually where it says Yarape, that God is giving doctors the ability to cure. It's kind of, that the healing, the healers will heal kind of thing. But it's very, very specific that doctors are given permission to heal. Very specific, like this is what their job is. It's not their job to, sometimes the doctors are predicting, this person's gonna live, however much longer, which whether or not that's consistent with other data or what they've usually seen, God does not give them the position to do that. That's God's province to see how long someone will live. A doctor could say, oh, this is not, we're gonna have to fight harder for this, but doctors are not allowed to take away hope from patients or to be giving them negative news and stuff like that. God has given you permission and ability to heal, and that's your province. It's very strictly said. Anyway, if the person who was struck dies, and there's other things that come from that. And then if a non-Jewish servant, like bondman, is struck, and especially if the master strikes him with a rod or something that that can actually do harm, right? It's in a lethal place, and then the bondman dies. The master could be put to death unless the bondman actually survives for a full day. It says because it's his property, so if he actually survives for a full day, then there's other punishments for the master. The death is only if he lives less than that, and this is specifically if the master struck him. There's now the law that if two men are fighting and one of them collides with a pregnant woman, and that's if it's not fatal, but the woman then miscarries, then there's a fine that occurs. There's compensation that we can't compensate, but there's compensation that occurs. There's an idea if it's a fatal injury, so the woman dies. This is the famous line of a life for a life and an eye for an eye and tooth etc. and a hand for a hand, etc. That's where this line comes in. And again, this is where the oral law is so important, because it's not a literal life for a life in that, or an eye for an eye that's only you have to gouge out someone's eye or anything like that. There's a whole monetary thing that occurs that you have to take the difference between the value of a slave on the market, in full health and after something harmful occurs to them. There's all these different kinds of compensations that are calculated according to this. There's also another, burn for burn, or wound for wound, or bruise for bruise, all this sort of stuff. In general, there's five forms of possible compensations that can be given. So it's the depreciation of value, there's compensation for pain, as in, if a regular person would say, how much would you be paid to have a bruise inflicted? Not the eye for an eye, but for burn or wound or bruise. Like how much money to have a bruise? How much money, whatever. Incapacitation, as in a person can't work, medical fees, and whatever sort of embarrassment that person might undergo. There has to be some sort of compensation for that also, and it's all calculated. It's very interesting also, in general, there's very few instances where a person is arrested and just stuck in jail. The Torah doesn't see punishment working like that, or consequence, you could say, working like that. Because if a person, you stick them in jail, there's no benefit, there's no productivity, there's nothing happens. The person just sits, and now what? So usually, whatever form of punishment or consequence would occur, it would happen immediately or within a few months, depending on what it was. But it wasn't something that was dragged out. It was something that happened, and then things, we got to keep moving with life, and we don't just lock somebody up. It's very different than the way the courts work today. Now, if there is a not Jewish bondman or bondwoman, they don't go free in the Shemitah year. The same way, like the man who sold if a man was a thief and he was sold, etc., etc. So if there's a non-Jewish bondman or bondwoman, they don't go free during Shemitah year. However, if a master strikes them and damages occur, eye, a finger, whatever it is, especially if it's destroyed, as in there's no recovery from what was happened, then the bond person gets to go free. Next, now it goes to the laws with animals. If an animal, like an ox or something like that, if it gores a person and the person dies, then the ox is stoned. And the carcass there could be no benefit coming from the carcass. That's if it's known already as an animal that gores. As in, if this has happened before. So this is 3 times, the animal gets about 3 chances for this. And it's also, the owner is responsible for guarding the animal, right? So it's not like, someone stumbled into its pen. That's different than the owner being negligent with keeping the animal away from other people. It's also, the owner has to be warned by the court, you better guard it, or this is what's going to happen, so the ox gets stoned. Okay, so if the person dies, the ox is stoned. But if a person does not necessarily die from it, if it's known as an ox that gores. Now, and then it says, if the owner didn't guard the ox after knowing that it was this kind of animal, then heaven's going to exact punishment from it. There's also, some people say that, some of the commentaries say, no, that means that the court's going to fine him according to the worth of a life. But now it also says, interestingly, that this same law applies for young children, because usually young children are exempt from a lot of the laws, or they're considered differently. But if an animal gores a young child, God forbid, then these same laws are going to apply to it. If the ox gores a bondman or bondwoman, then there's a set fine, a 30 silver shekel fine to the master, and then that the master has to pay. The master has to be paid, and the ox can also be stoned, depending on all that kind of stuff. Now, if a person uncovers a pit, or he digs a pit, right? It's in the public domain. So something that was covered over, he deepens a pit or something like that, and an ox or a donkey falls in, then the person has to pay restitution for the animal. There has to be compensation. Now we'll go back to the oxes. If, the animals. If an ox attacks another man's ox, like it gores it kicks it, whatever, so not another person, but another animal, and that other animal dies, then the live animal has to be sold, and half of it has to be paid to the owner, and they split the value of the carcass. So for example, let's say both of the oxen are worth $200. This is 200, this is 200. One of them attacks the other and it dies. Okay, so now he's left with the carcass. The carcass, let's say, is worth $50. Whatever he could get off of it. Okay, which means he's now got a loss of $150. So the first ox has to be sold and the carcass is sold. So now we've got $250. Split it in half, both sides get $125. That's the way it works. Now, if it's an ox that gored 3 times, right? This is the troublemaking ox, and it hasn't been guarded, then the amount of the ox has to be paid in full, minus the value of the carcass. So, for example, let's say Yeah, and the carcass remains by the owner. Now, it only is up to a certain amount. So let's say, for example, the ox that attacks is worth $200, and the ox that it kills is $500, and the carcass is $50. So now we're talking about a loss of $450. So, let's say you sell it and you get whatever it is. The loss would be $225, right? The loss split in half, whatever. But they only have to pay up to $200 because that's the value of the ox that was sold. A whole bunch of stuff. The courts figure it out, but this is the kind of stuff that the Torah is dealing with, because this is important for us, and especially in a more agrarian society, this is day-to-day life that people are dealing with, and the Torah covers all of it. Now, if a man steals a person's ox or sheep, right, and he slaughters and he sells it, then he has to pay 5 times the amount for the ox and 4 times the amount for the sheep. Okay, if the animal's still alive, he has to pay double. He has to get 2 more ox or 2 more sheep. Now, why is the ox more than the sheep? Because the ox is a working animal. It's an animal that's going to plow the ground, and it does stuff. So even though it's not used every day, you don't overturn soil every day, but still it just shows the value of productivity that now he doesn't have the ox anymore, and this is what it shows. If a thief is struck while breaking into someone's home, right, there's a guard there, and he tries to stop the thief, and the thief dies, the guardsman is not guilty, because the thief took it upon himself to have broken in. If there are witnesses, when the thief breaks in, of course, and then he's now liable. If there's witnesses when the thief broke in, as in it was in an area where witnesses told the guard, like, hey, be careful with him, and then he dies, then it's a different situation. He could be guilty of murder potentially. And of course, a thief is liable for whatever stolen. He has to give restitution or etc. Now, if a man takes an animal into another owner's fields, he just takes his animal and they're walking through someone's fields or vineyards, and his animals trample on that land or graze on the land, he has to pay damages. Or he says, okay, I'll give him another field. He has to give him the best of his field. It's actually a side note. It's interesting. That's why Abraham was very careful with where his flocks graze. It's part of why he got into a fight with his nephew Lot. He said, we'll take the animals far out to make sure they don't graze on anybody else's land. Now, then it goes if a fire breaks out on someone's property and it spreads, especially thorns, that it consumes grains or ruins like a newly plowed field or anything like that, he's got to pay restitutions. The fire is on your property and you didn't properly guard it and make sure it wasn't going to spread, so you're liable for it. Now we get to the whole thing of a watchman. So if someone's an unpaid watchman, as in, hey, can you please look out for this, for me, please? And let's say he took care of it, right? And then he wasn't negligent with it, but it was still stolen, right? So if the thief is found, the thief has to pay, double the amount, etc. But if the thief is not found, then the watchman has to go before a judge and swear, like, I didn't do anything. And if that's all the case, and it seems whatever, then he's not liable for anything because he was not paid to watch it. Now, if they discover that the watchman lied, right, the person who's supposed to be looking out for this item, he took from her more than he swore that he took from it, like, I only touched this one thing and that was it, whatever it is, then he now has to pay double, right? And this could be anything. It could be an animal or a garment, or it says anything. This covers like all the stuff. Now there's the idea of the paid watchman. Here, I'm going to give you $5 to look after this for me, or it could be an animal or anything like that. If it just dies from natural causes or sickness or something that's out of the owner's control, the watchman's control, or it gets maimed, or like there was a raid that occurs, so it gets stolen, and there's no witnesses, so he could swear to when the owner comes back, he swears like, I didn't do anything, I took care of it the way I was supposed to, and this is what occurred. He's not liable. If it's stolen, however, which means he could have been negligent. You didn't lock it down well enough. You didn't really take care of it. Then he might have to pay for it. The difference if it was attacked by wild animals, whether or not there's witnesses, whatever, whole thing. Now he doesn't. If it's like, well, a bear attacked it, he's not liable because that's not negligence. You can't be expected to go fight a bear. But if it's like, the dog was chasing after it, well, you could remove, don't let the dog bite the animal. Then there's also what's considered a borrower, someone who borrows something, and someone who hires or rents something. So if the borrower borrows something and it breaks, if it's an animal that dies or something like that, then he could be liable. And he can be liable even for an accidental loss or anything like that. The only exception is if the person he borrowed for is in his employ, and so then it's different. The person who hires is kind of like an in between the paid watchman and the borrower. This is all very complicated stuff. I mean, this is what the sages, this is what they discuss. This is what they're trying to figure out, day-to-day life. It depends if it was, the hire could be like the borrower as far as kind of like where the nature of the asking comes from. But as far as his responsibilities, it's kind of like the paid watchman. There's actually a whole, just to show you the depth and dimensions of the Torah, there's a whole sikha from the Rebbe about the spiritual counterparts of the unpaid watchman, the paid watchman, the borrower, and the hire, the renter, right? And this is that the divine soul comes into a Jewish person, right? And your person's given the divine soul. You got your fellow Jews, you got your fellow human beings, you got the whole world at large, right? So some people are like borrowers; they're only here, they live for themselves, right? And some people are like renters, so it's kind of like a give and take. Some people like paid watchmen where, I know I got to do good in the world and I also know there's going to be a reward for it. And some people are like the unpaid watchmen where it's like, I'm here. There's no benefit to me. I'm not here for myself. I'm here just to do good in the world, do as God wants in the world. So just show about the depth of that. Anyways, next mitzvah it goes to is that if a man seduces a virgin, especially one who hasn't been engaged, and especially if he ends up sleeping with her, then he has to marry her, and full rights and everything like that. Now, if the father doesn't let, and he's like, oh, you are not getting my daughter, then there's a monetary settlement that has to be paid. So it's about like 50 shekel, whatever that is. Machshefa lo sachaya, a witch, a sorceress is not allowed to live. Sodomy or bestiality, if a person is basically sleeps with an animal, death by stoning. Then it says you are not allowed to offer any sacrifices to another god, to idolatry. That can also, if there's witnesses, etc., that's also the death by stoning that can incur. Very specific and emphasized not to mistreat or take advantage of or anything like that. It says like a foreigner or like a convert, because you were once converts, you were once foreigners from the land of Egypt. You have to treat them well. They're one of the tribe. You have to treat them well. Same with you're not allowed to mistreat a widow and orphan, and if you do and they cry out, I'm going to listen to them, right? And my anger, it's going to stoke my anger, and I come after you basically. And it says that this person could be killed by the sword, and there will be no witnesses for it. So now that person's wife becomes kind of like a living widow, and the children can't inherit it because there's no one to affirm that the person died. Very very big stuff. Then it goes into laws of loans, okay, that it says there's actually immense reward attached to the idea of giving a loan to someone in need. Very, very specifically, if someone comes to you and they want a loan, and they need a loan, and you give it to them, and you always treat them with respect, not like, oh, don't forget I gave that to you, you don't treat them, you don't treat them off because of it. Specifically, when it's another Jewish person, you're not supposed to charge interest. This actually parenthetically goes back to the days of Europe, when all the Jews became money lenders because Christians couldn't charge interest with each other. So who's going to loan? The Jewish people could charge interest from the non-Jews, but Jews are not supposed to charge interest with each other. And there's like a whole order of priority. Like if this person comes to you, give to this person over that person. Like a family member over someone who's not, or one of your peoples over whatever. And then if a person can't immediately pay back or whatever it is, then there's some sort of, either like their day clothes were given, right? There was some sort of guarantee that was given. So, or like it's like a couch or something, but you have to return it. So you would take, the daytime garments, you would take that at nighttime, but you have to give it back to them during the day. They got to be able to go out, right? It says like a couch or something, which I guess is versus a bed. So you can take the couch, you have to give it back to them in the morning because where are they gonna rest on during the day? So there's all this kind of stuff going on, and it's still, even with all of it, the Torah is so considerate of both parties. Very specifically, don't curse Hashem or any of the leaders of the Jewish people. Don't delay on giving Truma Maaser, which is kind of like the tithing that goes either to the Levites or to the priests. Reminder that the firstborn of your children have to be redeemed. It's about 5 shekel that have to be paid, and also the firstborn of your ox and your sheep. It says specifically you should be holy. You should be a holy people. Don't eat meat that's been torn apart by a beast or by an animal that's been fatally wounded. It has to be properly shechted. Even if it gets shechted after some fatal wound, I think that's still not allowed to be eaten. Then it goes into courts. Now, don't accept a false report. As if you're a judge, don't listen. Don't be a false or corrupt witness. As in, don't collude with someone who wants to, And then to the judges, don't follow after the majority for evil, as in, don't just go along to get along. You got to be honest, and you got to tell the truth as you see it and know it. And this is for capital punishment. A simple majority doesn't work, as in 5 against 4 is not good enough. It has to be at least 2 judges, at least 2, to convict someone. But to acquit someone, only 1 judge, right? Because we're looking for the acquittal, I guess you could say. Also, it says like a lower judge, or you have the judges who are more highly regarded, or like the main judge or whatever, and the ones that were like lesser judges, they have to speak first, so that way they could say their piece, and it's not going to seem like they're contradicting the main judge, or that they're going to be too embarrassed to speak for him, so they speak first. Very specifically, don't show deference to a poor person, as you can't be like, oh, this guy is so poor and he came here for this, so we're just gonna decide the case in his favor, right? We got to be honest and we got to be truthful. It says if the ox or the donkey of your enemy is lost, you must return it, right? Why does it specify enemy? Well, because assumedly for a friend, we're going to return it. Very specifically for an enemy, you're going to be like, oh, whose is that? Oh, it's okay, not. No, you must return it. And if you see it crouched under its load, is that it's like the load is too big of a burden for it, you have to help unload it. Also for your enemy's animal, right? So also kind of like what we do with the paid watchman, the Baal Shem Tov has this whole thing where it talks about, you're going to see the donkey of your enemy and it's going to be crushed under its load and all that kind of like buckling under the load, and gives it also a much deeper dimension to it, as in the donkey is like the body, right? So the soul in the body is going to see the donkey, as in the body is going to see it as its enemy, right? But you can't just leave it there. You got to help it up, basically. Your soul and your body are not supposed to be in conflict with each other. The soul is supposed to help the body, bring it along and help it in divine service and all that sort of stuff. It tells us again, don't pervert justice for a poor person. Midvar sheker tirchak, stay far away from falsehood. If a new witness comes up in the case of capital punishment, then you can retry. You could do the trial again only if someone has been convicted. If someone has been acquitted already, then you don't redo the trial. Don't accept a bribe, even if it's from the person who you're anyways going to be deciding in favor of, because accepting a bribe is setting it up that they're going to be blind to justice, that you're not going to be able to do things correctly. Okay, then the Torah shifts now to speak about the Shemitah, which is the 7th year. Every 6 years, you work the land, you take care of the land. The 7th year is the Shemitah year. You must leave your fields, your vineyards, your olive groves must be left untended. So whatever's growing naturally is just open for anyone to take, but you can't specifically plow and sow and harvest it. It also says 6 days you're going to work, and the 7th day is Shabbos, right? Even though the Shemitah year is kind of like a whole sabbatical year, but the laws of Shabbos are still applying. Then it says, guard all that I've told you to do, which now is making all the positive precepts into like a double thing, because it's also like, don't not do what I've told you to do. Make sure you do what you're supposed to be doing. It also says very specifically, don't mention the name of other gods. Like, even if you're going to give someone directions, or you're going to be like, hey, meet me at the statue of, whatever the god's name is, you're not allowed to do that. Don't even mention it. Try not to engage in a situation where the other person is going to end up swearing by their god, by their idol. Try not to do it. Stay away from that. Don't do that. Now it goes into, we're at the last chunk, the Shalosh Regalim. That's the 3 major holidays, the 3 that the Jewish, specifically the men, but the Jewish people were expected to go up to Jerusalem for. So it's Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. Pesach, it says, don't come to me empty-handed. You got to bring a sacrifice. The sacrifice can only be offered once all the leavened bread has been cleared from your house. Shavuos is Bikurim, which is the first of the fruits, and that's specifically the 7 types of produce that Israel is known for: wheat and barley, grapes, dates, pomegranates, olives, and figs. And then Sukkot, and also the holiday of Sukkah. So Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. That's basically when the wheat ripens, when it's harvested, and when it's gathered from the field after everything, all the processes that occur. And the holidays are not necessarily called by this. Like Pesach is called Chag HaMatzos, right? And some of them are referred to by their season, which also just emphasizes part of like when we have a Jewish leap year, that everything is supposed to be celebrated in season. Which is like this year, for example, is a Jewish leap year. We add a whole month in to make sure each thing will be celebrated as proper season. Next, don't eat the young animal in the mother's milk, which is one of the prohibitions against eating meat and milk together. Okay, now this is the end of the specific mitzvah. Now it kind of wraps up. We kind of get back into the narrative and it wraps it up. God says, I'm going to send an angel before you that's going to lead you into the land. The place I've designated is the place for the Beis HaMikdash. You got to heed him. My name is with him. He's not going to take kindly to sin. He's not going to be so forgiving. And if you do these things, then I will become an enemy to your enemies. I'm going to give you the land of the Amori, the Chiti, the Perizi, Kanani, Chivi, and Yevusi. There was actually, so that's the six of the nations that lived in the land then. There was a seventh nation, the Girgashi, and they left. When they heard the Jewish people were coming, they got out. Officially, they were given a beautiful land in Africa somewhere or something like that because they were gone. And it's very specific. You got to drive these people out of the land, because, don't worship their gods, don't follow their ways. You got to destroy any of the pillars or temples they set up. You got to destroy all of it, and because you must serve me. And you keep them around, you're gonna be led astray, God forbid. So everyone's got to go. Now it's also, if it says, if you fulfill my will, there's going to be no miscarriage. There will be no miscarriages, and a woman won't be barren, and you're going to live the full count of your days. So when the Jewish people lived in the land, everyone doing what they're supposed to be doing would create this blessing across the entire land, across the whole nation. Then it goes back, doing what we're supposed to be doing, that your enemies are going to flee before you. It says this whole thing about I'm going to send poisonous, like hornets, are going to go after them. They're going to come from the east bank of the Jordan. They're going to take care of 3 of the tribes. How this whole thing is going to go on. Now it also says that when they're going to be driven out, it's not going to happen in a single year, but it's going to happen like slowly, because if you drive them all out in a single year, you're not a big enough nation yet to populate the land of Israel, right? It's going to get overrun, or wild animals are come. So it's going to be a gradual thing until you're going to be enough to populate the land. In the times of Joshua, it took 14 years to fully conquer the land. So, anyways, and then I'm going to set up borders for you from the Sea of Reeds to the Mediterranean, from the desert to the Euphrates, etc. Okay, now we go back and we finish up the narrative of the giving of. This occurred with the beginning of the Torah, with the giving of the Torah. So it goes back to instructions about who can ascend on the mountain and where. So you have Moshe, Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, who are Aaron's sons, and then the 70 elders, right? And Moshe, you could come all the way up, they can only come partially up, etc. So on the 4th of Sivan, remember the Torah is given on the 6th of Sivan. So on the 4th of Sivan, Moshe relays God's words to the people are going to commit to it. Moshe wrote down the Torah up until that point, from creation to that point, till the day, and then all the other sections of laws, he wrote those down also. This is the scroll, the Sefer of the Covenant, this is what we got. On the 5th day, Moshe built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and there were 12 pillars for each of the tribes. The firstborn gave olos, shlamim, bulls as sacrifices. Then this whole thing was like a sprinkling of the blood. You had to half divide the blood, and part of it was sprinkled on the altar, and part of it was sprinkled on the people. Moshe read the scroll, and this is where we have Nasa v'nishma. We will do and we listen to everything that God has spoken. So then they go up the mountain, and there's this part of the group, the Nadav and Avihu and the 70 elders kind of they looked after Moshe farther than they were supposed to. They didn't actually walk after him, but they looked more than they were supposed to when they went up the mountain. It says they had this vision of God, and there was under his feet there was like a brick of sapphire, and there was this appearance of just these clear heavens. Whatever that's supposed to mean. Now they were going to be punished for that, for doing that, but their punishment was delayed because the time of giving the Torah, God delayed it. Now Hashem now invites Moshe to come up the mountain for 40 days to learn the Torah. Yoshua goes with Moshe, and he sets up his tent at the base of the mountain. He is going to sit there. He will wait for Moshe to come back down. God was going to give Moshe the luchos now, the stone luchos. Moshe tells the elders, the 70 elders, the leaders, to stay here until I come back. I'm going to be back on the 40th day before noon. Stay here, kind of take care of the people for me. You have Aaron is here, Hor, who's the son of Miriam, is here, and they can help you. Any cases that come before you, they'll help take care of it. The mountain was covered with a cloud, and so to the Jewish people, God's glory, this was like God's glory resting on the mountain, and it was there for 6 days, right until the giving of the Torah. And then the 7th day, that's when Moshe was called up to go up to the top of the mountain, right? And the Jewish people, they kind of saw this cloud as like consuming fire. That's what they saw. And then the Torah portion ends off, the Moshe went up to the mountains 40 days and 40 nights. And that is